the Megasloth's fur was battered aside by the force of Staves's rifle. A bullet whizzed out and knocked a screaming Tranker warrior into the river beside the barn. Staves poked his head up atop the Megasloth's back and tapped his feet against it so that it would maneuver him into position for his next shot. And it wasn't the ordinary thunderbolts he was shooting. One of the benefits of having gun-expert huntsmen around was that the crew were a little more up to date with their firearms. Staves was peering through a telescopic sight on a sleek plastic-coated sniper rifle, resting on little feet on the top of the Megasloth's head. Tumas had it even better, having been gifted a delightfully deadly machine gun. From atop the western wall of the fort, he rattled out magazine after magazine of poorly aimed shots into the crowds of Tranker trying to get up to the barn, where the river was shallow and the castle walls thin. Needless to say, this was having quite an effect on those warriors, but they persisted all the same, with their cry of Kote growing louder each time the machine gun fell quiet. Comareiro was in the barn, trying to push back into place the bricks that the Tranker sappers were ramming out of the wall. "You bring the Kote on yourself with your broken voice," Comareiro insisted through the gaps. "It is the fire tender, he lives, and he cannot even hear the voice of the Kote," someone claimed on the other side. "I heard the voice, but it faded. The Kote does not wish to reach us here." "It has rejected him. He has failed," was the almost joyous claim from outside. Such words caused Comareiro's repairs to falter, and more bricks fell loose. Then Shah strode over, stuck her rifle roughly through one of the gaps, and rhythmically pumped shots blindly, waving the barrel this way and that between each shot. The beating on the wall ceased. "Very strange religion this," she commented. "Doesn't seem to be doing you or them any good." "It is not to do good for us, but for the mass and the future," Kerma said quietly. She was sitting on an upturned animal trough in the dark, her head hanging low over Staves's old bolt-action thundergun across her lap. She had got a stick stuck in the top of the magazine and wasn't willing to work out how to fix it. "Sounds like we're on our own then, unless your friends can be reasoned with," Shah said. Comareiro shook his head. "They do not know," he said. Then the wall suddenly collapsed all at once as a ball of Tranker smashed through with hammers. Comareiro gripped his sword. "Kote!" he shouted. Outside, huntsmen pushed through a partial break in the wall around the outer fields, amateurishly splashed and spluttered his way across the river, and then raced up behind the Tranker war party with an axe in one hand and a pistol in his other. Time for him to do his showing off thing, which is especially easy when you know that your foes' arrows and spears probably won't get past your fancy spaceman armor. And it's even easier when peril is constantly avoided by the work of a large man hiding on top of a scary-looking megasloth in the nearby undergrowth. Bullets whizzed and thudded, blades hissed and scraped, and between the raid from behind and the resistance in the barn to the front, the Tranker were completely vanquished. Bodies washed down the river from beside the gap in the barn wall, where Comareiro waved out to huntsmen. "You are alive?" Comareiro noted. "Yeah, totally," Huntsman replied. Then both fell to the ground as their bleeding cuts got the better of them. A lot of the crew were injured by that particular attack, for it was greater than any before. Why? It was something of a last-ditch effort by Comareiro and Kerma's village to satisfy the so-called voice of the Kote. After the previous incident with the murderous whispers and the underground death machine, a clearer idea of what that voice is like may begin to form in your mind. To help that along further, something of a seminar was being arranged. Everyone gathered in the medical cave, where half the crew were being put to bed or mummified with bandages. It was the perfect time for a little explanation of, well, everything. "So, who here doesn't know about Earth?" Shah asked. No one raised their hand except Staves, who quickly put it down. "And who is lying?" Shah added. No one, apparently. "This is why I didn't want to do this. Sorry there's more to life than you know. You'll have to admit it one day, she said. Let me try, Butter, Tumas said. I think the problem is we got one lot here who think their world is the only one, another lot from this world who think it's the only one, then there's us who've seen the whole Baronat. How many worlds are there really? Staves asked. Boy shot him a disgruntled expression. That's the spirit, Stavey, Tumas said. Maybe it's really weird to hear it, but there's loads of Baronat out there. But I think our resident OPA tool might as well tell you. Thank you, Tumas. You're quite the tool yourself, Shah said, polite of her to return the compliment. I'll just tell you, and you can believe me or not. Now, we, all of us, are humans. What is a human? Well, in dangerous environments, one can observe the process of evolution by natural selection. So, Shah actually gave a pretty long version of the story. Let's summarize and skip to the bits that we need to know. Humans go from Earth to its sister planet Margin, where Shah and Tokka were from, to Earth again, to all kinds of places around Earth, and eventually to places very, very far away from Earth. So many places that people literally forgot how many, not helped by the fact it was pretty hard to hear back from them. At some point, the core humans tried to get a handle on the situation and created the Inner and Outer Passage administrations, who oversaw logistics regarding the officially sponsored colonies of the Inner Passage and the semi-remembered colony-like dumpster fires of the Outer Passage, aka the Rimworlds. Close together in the messy Outer Passage were Retakot and Pieces, colonized at the same time about 5,000 mini-years prior. This is where the heresy, sacrilege and unwelcome history lessons come in for the crews from either world. Retakot was the first to be colonized, called One Bastia in that era. It was a very popular colony and couldn't keep up with the new arrivals. Hence they quickly started recolonizing to the empty lot next door, so to speak, that being Pieces. However, Pieces suffered from major setbacks as the planet wasn't finished, it being an artificial body moulded from, well, pieces. The effect was that when a huge wave of One Bastion colonists were sent there, there was nowhere close to enough colonial gear to set up shop in the usual fashion. So they came up with their own gear, fashioned from wood, stone, iron, and what people remembered from Forest Camp back on One Bastia. They didn't remember much. The feudal realms of Pieces were born, and a few thousand spins later, they had only the One Bastion tongue of the priestly class to remember such histories by. Did they remember them? Obviously to boy and lady this all sounded like complete fiction, no reason to believe it at all. Staves sat quietly though, until he finally said, "That's what it used to say, in the forbidden books." "You what, Wonk?" Boy said. "In the castle. The priests have books about this, about the Pieces. They said they were from the cosmos and so were the people. I thought it was just a story, but they kept it hidden because they liked how it talked about beautiful girls with furry ears a lot. But were they hiding it because it was the truth, and they were lying to us about the Overlord creating us?" "But that can't be true," Boy burst out, but Shah waved him back into his chair and emitted a shushing sound with mysteriously potent effects. "You can process this on your own time. Don't ruin the story. Now, the OPA disowned that disaster immediately and didn't come back to it until 80 years ago. Let's follow their example and focus on Retakot. Believe it or not, this place had it even worse." Now the part of the story Comareiro and Kerma were going to get offended by. The story of Wombastia/Retakot is much more strange. The brief testimony of Cardenas, the survivor from that era who had passed through the fort on the way to the grave, already laid out a tale of apocalypse. The problem was with the so-called mover, which was supposedly a machine used in the terraforming of the planet. It lived in the ground and could not only move itself, but move mountains quite literally. Rumor was that someone had tried to find and destroy it, and that it got very angry. Thus began the legendary roll-up, which was indeed a case of areas of the planet getting rolled up. Comareiro and Kerma were actually a little shocked to hear this, since the idea of a physical interpretation of the roll-up had been lost through the long oral histories of the tribes emerging from the survivors of that time. As you might have noticed, The Tranker were willing to associate just about anything with the Cotte or roll-up. But it was simpler than they imagined, sort of. For completeness, I'll add that in between that apocalypse and today, a half-hearted second colonization had created the Tets and Erefs and the perpetual war that defined the planet today. At some point in our era, the name of the planet became its colloquial name, the Rolling Mass, or Retakot. The Outer Passage administration, responsible for the planet, were far more interested in the fact that its solar system was packed with rare metals, so the planet became an afterthought to an array of space stations, including the famous Orbital. All very nice, but then comes the juicy part.
So, as far as I can tell, the OPA is winding things down up there, Shah explained. There weren't many of us left in the main tubes, just enough to manage the last bits of extraction work. Obviously they didn't tell me why, but I'm pretty sure I know what's going on here. And, Holt, this is where you'll stop pestering me for tips, alright? Scaria, and everything else. It's Roll-Up Part 2, the scheme of the IPA. This system's getting a promotion to Inner Passage status, and they're supposed to turn it into something respectable. They want a clean slate, don't they? OPA will go off to pieces, I expect, and try to get them back into the humanosphere, while IPA moves in, rolls this place up, and uses colony kits properly to just make a planet for core folk. Luckily for them, they've got an easy way to do it. This planet's mover's a trained warrior. Been sitting there coming up with ways to kill us since the beginning, since we all got flagged as enemies. All the RPA needs to do is give it the go-ahead to do whatever it wants, override any safety measures that kicked in from the old days, and, well, we'll see what it's come up with.
I have to call Sadsky, Holt said, rushing out.
Nothing we can do,
Shah called after him.
Except escape,
Lady said.
The ship, the message, we have to escape.
But we didn't find the bloody bits here, Boy protested.
They don't have our pieces. We have their pieces, Staves said, turning Boy's face completely pale.
You Wonk, you don't know anything about this, he said.
This is all wrong,
Kermit protested, immediately cheering Boy up.
The mass cannot be controlled. It is a cycle, just as one line ends and another begins. How can it be metal life in the ground? That is not even possible with your Zapper tricks.
With perfect timing, the ground rumbled, and those who were out of bed went to see what was happening outside. Nothing obvious, but on a hunch, Staves checked the spot of the previous rumbly disturbance, where that metal thing from underground had come out and tried to kill him. Yes, this suddenly seems to make a lot more sense in the light of this mover theory. And yes, it was happening again. This time, the big metal lump sitting there was bigger, and death robots were patrolling around it carefully. Something glittery was seeping from the cylinder and fluttering down onto the ground. Wherever it touched the soil, little whiffs of smoke would rise up, and the grasses and heathers would turn black before Staves's very eyes.
The mover's back, and it's going to kill us all,
he panted after running back to the cave.
Well, that's the short version of my story, isn't it?
Shah shrugged. Same thing as before, is it? Boy asked.
Yeah. Lots of the living armor things around though. And it's leaking something out, using magic on the soil, killing everything, Staves said.
The soil? Well, this got serious, Boy nodded. He went down himself to take a peek, and indeed saw that a growing radius of ground around the metal thing was turning black and barren. If it had got that far in an hour or so, it would be hitting the outermost crop fields within days. Better blow it up, right? Well, Boy wasn't so sure about that, because the patrolling death robots had all angles covered. There were loads of those tank-like gun platforms, and a few of the upright insectoid ones packing large, long weapons of unknowable design. After hearing all this back in the fort, Holt had an idea. I'm calling it in. Can't be just us, he said. He went to Shah's lab, where among the various devices that had been assembled, there was a large steel console the size of a dining table. It was essentially a very powerful version of the cosmic rod, and with it, Holt could shoot his voice right through the mountains and into the halls of Tetius with crystal clarity.
digging machines keep appearing all over the flats, Councillor Satsuki said to him. I don't understand it.
Yeah, well, the rumor from the OPA spacer is that there's a whole lot more below our feet, and something's making it mad.
You sound like a tribal, Holt.
Nope, tribals were just trucking right for once. The mass, it's gonna roll, Satsuki.
What are you talking about?
New spacers are coming, and they want a clean slate for when they show up. Something like that. They've activated some old machines from the first days, trucking crawling about underground somewhere, and now they're coming up and poisoning the plants. But don't go near them without heavy ordnance, cause those things spit out death robots, like you hear about in the old ruins sometimes.
So this is all because of those stupid first wavers?
Don't worry about blaming, worry about blowing those things up before it gets worse.
What did you say?
Huh? What?
At this point, the signal became untenably fuzzy, then cut off entirely. Outside the room, Holt could hear a commotion. Didn't take long to see why. Something great and green was crawling across the sky. It was a fog, spreading with incredible force and speed from one horizon to the other.
Is this the roll-up, Comareiro? Lady asked in panic. It can only be, Comareiro managed to say, frozen on the spot.
Your swords and firebows won't be enough this time, Kerma said, sounding rather smug about this latest dire development. She was getting ahead of herself. There was no guarantee that this green fog was going to kill them all. It wasn't for another 2 hours that this became clear. The fog became thicker and lower, filtering out all but the greenest of light, turning the mountainside into an alien landscape, even where the herbicidal glitter from the underworld hadn't wasted everything away. The air became painful to breathe, and stained one's clothes and skin with a dusty, warm-feeling film. Staves rushed about to get the animals into the barn. Kerma, after standing around watching everyone nervously fret for a while, went out to see if the dogs were okay. There wasn't much else you could do in a situation like this. Retakot was playing quite the hand. Wasn't so bad if you stayed indoors, but that's where the 1-2 punch came in. Hiding would only mean letting those underground machines spread their poison. Air kills the animals, ground kills the plants, the Kote wins with none of this silly, literally rolling up required. Overall, big trouble. Peering from the exterior doors, the crew could only marvel at the majestic, soupy sky that was killing them all.
We have to stay in the caves. We can keep going deeper and live a long time in there,
Tokka insisted.
We've got a year of food, but what about next year? Boy said. And it's only frozen because of the blowwork machines. Overlord can kill us by just stopping the winds. We're out of options.
And everything in the forest. They're breathing it all, Staves lamented. We have to go get as many animals into the barn as we can.
And waste good lungs dying for them? Try again, Butter, Huntsman said.
But we can't let anything die.
It's you or them, Butter. Can't get around that.
You can't fight it, Meat Man. It is their time, Kerma said.
But not ours, Comareiro added. The end rolls over the flat cave, and we live. That is because it knows it need only shrivel our meager gardens. It does not anticipate a struggle. Sounds like we better struggle a bit then, Tumas said. We blew up the last metal worm thing. If we're gonna die here, might as well just go full butternut and hit the dice with the death robots. We'll slay the haunted armors and save this land, Boy declared.
It wouldn't try to save you, Kerma pointed out. No need to be so pessimistic about it, Shah said. I could have just stayed up in the station if I wanted to be a disposable inconvenience to the new management. I had hoped to live and to leave, but even if we die of mashed potato overdose in this buzzy hole, I think we're luckier than most, don't you?
Kerma did not think that, but it was true. Not everyone had a cave full of food and an underground river to keep them going through this disaster. Disaster isn't the right word, really, since it almost implies it was natural or accidental. The poisoning of ground and air was not such a thing. The much talked about roll-up was now actually happening before their eyes, and after all the waxing lyrical about how inevitable it was from Comareiro, it seemed almost fair. But surely our crew won't let the world die without a fight? Of course not. Boy's Holy Crusade was here. It was time for a war with the Kote, with the Inner Passage administration, and the mysterious forces of ancient Retakot itself.